Goodfellas made it look like Henry Hill finally got away. But the real story went somewhere the film could never show you. Because the truth is, Henry Hill was too bad for Goodfellas. What actually happened after he became an informant tells a completely different story. And it followed him through every fake name, every new city, and every second chance the government gave him. The difference shows up immediately. In May 1980, U.S. Marshals showed up without warning and told the Hill family to leave immediately. His son Greg was 13, his daughter Gina was 11, and they were told to grab whatever they could and throw it into garbage bags. Not suitcases, garbage bags. Whatever didn't fit stayed behind forever, and they left New York that night without saying goodbye to anyone. The Marshals placed them in Omaha, Nebraska, a quiet city where nobody would think to look for a mob informant. The plan was simple: stay invisible, stay alive. That plan lasted for about one evening. On the very first night, Henry took his family out to dinner at a place called Godfather's Pizza. He walked in loud, drank openly, and acted exactly the way he always had back in New York. Every head in the room turned. A family that was supposed to vanish stood out without even trying, and his kids watched it happen in real time. And it kept going from there. Instead of keeping his head down, Henry started walking to payphones and calling his old contacts back in New York. The same people who had every reason to want him dead. Word started spreading fast. Jimmy Burke already suspected Henry was somewhere in the Midwest, and a bounty started climbing. It eventually reached $2 million. None of that changed anything. He kept calling. He kept drawing attention. The government could move him across the country, but they had no way to move him away from himself. And back in New York, Henry had already talked to enough people that Jimmy Burke knew he was somewhere in the Midwest. That information alone was enough to put the entire family at risk. The Marshals moved the family again, this time in the middle of the night, and they landed in Independence, Kentucky. A new place, another fresh start, same person. Within weeks, Henry found his way to Turfway Park Racetrack. At first, it looked like a man just passing time, placing small bets to stay busy. But he started studying the track, learning the patterns, meeting the right people, and before long, he was running scams again. Same behavior, different city. There were also rumors that he got tangled in a shady deal connected to the state governor. The full details were never made clear, but the fact that it was even being talked about says something on its own. And then came the detail that is almost hard to believe. He had a racehorse named Banana Split shipped across the country for his daughter. A man living under a fake name, with a $2 million bounty on his head, bringing in a registered racehorse that generates paperwork, records, and attention. Every single move created a trail, and every decision made him easier to find. At some point, it stopped looking like recklessness and started looking like he was deliberately unraveling his own protection. And while all of this was happening, something else was going on in the background. In 1981, while still inside witness protection, Henry met a woman named Sherry Anders. He didn't tell her who he really was. He didn't mention the mob, the program, or the fact that he already had a wife and 2 children living with him under the same roof. He married her in Virginia City, Nevada, which made it a second marriage happening at the same time as the first, and both were happening while the federal government was actively protecting him. This wasn't just reckless behavior anymore. This was a federal crime being committed inside a federal protection system. He wasn't just breaking the rules. He was using the program itself as cover to run another life. Sherry Anders had no idea she had married a man who didn't legally exist. The system that was keeping him alive had quietly become a tool for something else entirely. But everything up to this point still misses the worst part. Nobody talks about what was happening behind closed doors, and this is the part that is genuinely hard to sit with. Greg and Gina Hill wrote about those years later in life, and what they described had nothing to do with the mafia. The danger they remembered most was already inside the house with them. No stable friendships, no family anywhere nearby, and every time a new town started to feel even slightly familiar, they were pulled out and dropped somewhere else. New name, new school, new version of themselves to perform for strangers. They never got to just be kids. Henry was deep into cocaine and alcohol and made no effort to hide it. He would vanish for days, and when he came back, everyone in the house felt it immediately. A silent Henry meant brace yourself. A loud Henry meant it was already too late. Trash bags full of marijuana sat out in the open in the same rooms where his children ate and slept. Karen knew everything and kept the cover story running, telling the marshals what they needed to hear while helping Henry hide what he was doing. The whole household was built around protecting one person, and it wasn't the children. The program was sold to this family as safety. What they actually got was isolation with no exit, living under the same roof as the most volatile person in their lives, with nowhere to go and no one to tell. Greg eventually reached a point where leaving was the only option he had left. At 19, he changed his name, cut every connection to his family, and disappeared on his own terms. It was the only way he could find. And for Henry, it caught up to him, too. By 1987, the government had tolerated years of scams, lies, and chaos. But Henry was now in Redmond, Washington, and he set up a cocaine deal with undercover DEA agents. 1 pound, which meant distribution. After everything they had absorbed, this was the moment that ended it. The government removed him from witness protection entirely. No more new identities, no more relocations, no more safety. Everyone assumed what would happen next. A man like Henry Hill, out in the open with no cover and people who wanted him dead? That should have ended fast. But nothing happened. He stayed alive. He gave interviews, appeared on television, and called into the Howard Stern show talking openly about his past. There was no fear in any of it. The reason was straightforward. Paul Vario died in prison in 1988. Jimmy Burke died in 1996. Tommy DeSimone had already been gone since 1979. The people who had reason to act were either dead or sitting in prison watching their organizations get dismantled under RICO prosecutions. By the time Henry was living openly, the structure that once hunted him had collapsed. And beyond that, he was no longer useful as a target. He had already given his information, already done the damage, and going after him would only bring more heat. He was already destroying himself on his own. What came after that wasn't a comeback. The rest of his life didn't recover. He tried opening a restaurant, but it closed fast. He sold pasta sauce and paintings, but nothing created any real stability. The addiction stayed. The damage stayed. Karen moved on with her life, and his children lived under different names he never knew. There was no repair, no reunion. On June 12, 2012, Henry Hill died in a hospital in Los Angeles. He was 69 years old. Goodfellas showed you a man who got out. What it didn't show you is what he did after. Because in the end, the mafia never had to destroy Henry Hill. He was already doing that himself, one city at a time.